The talks were meant to bring an end to the conflict in Libya and be a diplomatic victory for Russia and Turkey. But after General Khalifa Haftar left the talks in Moscow without agreeing to a long-term truce, they appeared to end in failure. Speaking to media a day after, however, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov played down the outcome, saying the peace plan put forward by Moscow and Ankara was still a work in progress.
Representatives of Libyan society met in Moscow with the participation of the Russian and Turkish foreign and defence ministers. We will continue our work on this track. So far, there has been no definitive outcome.
Libya has seen heavy fighting for months. The country's internationally recognised administration, the Government of National Accord, led by Fayez Sarraj, is based in Tripoli. It's facing a power challenge from General Khalifa Haftar's rival administration, based in the east of the country, in the city of Tobruk. Haftar's forces, calling themselves the Libyan National Army, are reportedly being assisted by Russia and regional allies Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Meanwhile, Ankara, along with the United Nations, is backing Tripoli's Government of National Accord. Earlier this month, Turkey's parliament gave President Recep Tayyip Erdogan the green light to send troops to Tripoli. And after the Moscow talks failed to offer a solution on Tuesday, Erdogan provided a clear warning.
In the
coming days, we will be closely following the choices that the coup plotter Haftar and the country's legitimate government will make. In the event that attacks against the country's legitimate government and our Libyan brothers continue, we will never refrain from giving Haftar the lesson he deserves.
Now the focus moves from Moscow to Berlin. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has invited top officials from a host of countries for peace talks on Sunday, in the hope that this time around, something might be different.
And for more tonight, I'm joined from London by Anas El Gumati. He's the head of the Sadek Institute. That's a think tank focusing on Libyan affairs. Anas, it's good to have you on the program. I want to talk about this conference in Berlin in just a moment, but I want to remind our viewers there is a legitimate government in Tripoli at the moment, supported at least by the United Nations, yet it is under siege. What does that say, in your opinion, about the UN's ability to secure the peace in Libya?
Well, the UN framework led by the Security Council is ultimately broken in Libya now. It was the UN that came in 2011 when it gave its mandate in 1973, in 2011 to bring around its responsibility to protect doctrine. It led the calls internationally to intervene in Libya to save civilian lives from Muammar Gaddafi after the Arab Spring started in February 2011. Now, 9 years later almost, we're talking about a situation that is radically different. It is the UN Security Council's framework which is broken, and there's been many allegations, mainly levelled at France, for having supported discreetly Khalifa Haftar since 2014 and 15 during the second civil war, and then not allowed to sanction him or threaten him or condemn him ever since that moment. So the UN Security Council's framework, and the framework that is supposed to resolve conflict and defend and protect civilian lives, has really been threatened by the example of this latest conflict in Libya.
Well, I mean, distill this down for us. If we go back to 2011, there was this belief the Arab Spring was beginning. There was this belief that something good could happen in the Arab world and in Northern Africa. The U.S. President Barack Obama, he put the resolution to the UN Security Council, and intervention took place. And it did not work the way it was planned. Do you want to venture an explanation there? What happened? Was the international community then too naive?
Well, I think it is certainly naive enough to think that slogans alone, like down with Mubarak, or down with Gaddafi, or down with Assad or Ben Ali, that these things would result in or manifest change all on their own. I think slogans were one thing, but programs and really significant change beyond just the head of a state, because those states have really deep tentacles, and that is an element of what has been going on across the Arab world, where you have the deep state that is the remnants of those former regimes, those networks, those political, economic and security networks, those patronage networks, how you govern a country beyond just a figurehead, how you deliver security and almost disenfranchise many of your population. Those things, no one had a clue about how to solve them, let alone the local populations that had rose up in different cities. Now, we saw in Egypt that it returned to autocratic regime in 2013, attempted in Tunisia in 2015, in Sudan very, very recently as well. There has been a crackdown, so you're sort of seeing Arab Spring 2.0, even with Lebanon and Iraq. Perhaps those moments in 2011 were somehow different, but it doesn't mean that people have kind of given up on this spring, because I think there is really a movement that is going across the world that those things don't kind of go out of fashion. The danger is not understanding the way that those things have been put to bed. Because ultimately, when you look at a place like Tripoli today and its war over the last 9 months, you have this small little flicker and flame left of democratic aspiration that is almost going to be extinguished, but not under the pretext of putting down the Arab Spring or putting down human rights or freedom of expression or freedom of association. Those things are, they're difficult to put down. You can't, and they're too fashionable for you to say them outright. So what has happened is that there has been a new movement called the Return to Authoritarian Stability, and that has come at a great expense across the Arab world, and especially in Libya.
And back in 2011, as I said earlier in the program, Germany did not support the UN resolution. The no-fly zone over Libya was something that Germany did not want to participate in, and it proved that Germany, despite all the criticism, was probably right at the time in looking towards the future. And now we have Germany this coming Sunday trying to mediate some form of peace. But we're talking about 9 years between 2011 and today. Is a European country's efforts to bring peace to Libya too little, too late?
I think we have to really look internally. There's a lot of soul searching that needs to take place in Europe, because there are so many things that could have been done, but we brush it under the carpet and we get here 9 years later. One thing that Europe can do very, very easily and very, very, with enough adequate political will, is to enforce an arms embargo. You can only fight if you have arms and weapons being supplied. Over the last 3 days alone, since the Moscow talks have ended, there have been huge shipments from the UAE Special Forces base in Abu Dhabi going to eastern Libya. That has given someone like Khalifa Haftar, who left Moscow knowing that he had the backing to go and fight. Now, if the UN or Germany or the European Union wanted to try to enforce an arms embargo, that would force the local players to have no other option but peace. But you need to make peace look lucrative, and you have to make war look costly. It's easy to say 9 years after the fact that somehow it's better to not vote on these things, because for every situation like Libya, you have a worse one like Syria, or you have genocides that were like in Rwanda 20 years ago, and sometimes abstaining from these decisions is not going to make them go away.
Well,
we have a desperate situation in Libya.
I'm just wondering. I'm sorry, there's feedback here, and I'm sorry about that. Let me just ask you, though, what about the credibility of the German chancellor? I mean, it's clear that Europe and Germany don't want another migration crisis like we had in 2015, and they don't want one coming from Libya, which would explain why they want to do something in Libya. Does the German chancellor, in your opinion, is she the one leader right now who has the credibility to get people to make promises that they will keep?
Germany has a great reputation, at least in Libya, for its non-interventionist policy at the very least. Its neutrality is not being called into question at any moment, given the announcement of this Berlin conference from over 4 months ago. So I think it's the adequate forum. But the question really is, and certainly Angela Merkel has all the credibility that any world leader should enjoy when they're trying to host a conference like this. But the real question is there adequate political will in Europe that can emanate from Germany and emanate from that meeting? Because, to be frank, we could have had this meeting on Skype 9 months ago. The participants are all members of the international community. They don't need visas to get to Germany. So the question really is, are there members of the international community that are ripe enough to want to solve this? Because there's only one thing that you can do with fear, and fear is easily manipulable. It's something that could be manipulated by other actors, seemingly like Russia could continue to manipulate the situation and use the migration crisis to create more fear about what could come in the future. But the question is there adequate political will to put this to bed? And I don't know if there is.
Yeah, and you're right. It could have been as simple as a Skype video call, but it wasn't. Anas El Gammadi joining us tonight from London. Anas, we appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.